Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on Heritage Events Live. I don't know about where you are, but it's currently snowing and sleeting here in Washington, D.C. But we've got a great event in store for you today. Building Tomorrow's Army Today, Modernizing with Science, Technology, and Engineering. Well, as many of you may know, over the last 3 years, the Army has reimagined its modernization organization, its priorities, and its programs. It has done this to orient on great power competition, marking a significant departure from the previous 15 years of counterinsurgency operations. In somewhat of a wake-up call, then Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Joseph Dunford testified before Congress in June of 2017, saying that in just a few years, if we don't change the trajectory, we will lose our qualitative and quantitative competitive advantage, and the consequences will be profound, in my judgment. Well, to prevent that fate, the Army stood up a new command, Futures Command, 8 cross-functional teams, and established 6 modernization priorities. As part of the stand-up of Futures Command, the Army moved the Research, Development, and Engineering Command, or RDECOM, from Army Materiel Command to Futures Command. And they renamed it the Combat Capabilities Development Command, which is admittedly a mouthful, to Combat Capabilities Development Command, or DEVCOM. DEVCOM has the mission to provide innovative research, development, and engineering to produce capabilities that provide decisive overmatch to the Army. Today, we are fortunate to have the leader of DEVCOM, Major General John George, here to give us an update on how things are going. We'll hear from General George, then I'll ask him a few questions to get things going, and then we'll turn to you, the audience, for your questions, which, as our support person mentioned, you can enter right at the tab for questions, and they'll come right to me, and I'll pose them to our guest. So that'll be very exciting. But first, let me introduce Major General John George. General George assumed command of the Development Command about a year ago in November of 2019. He's a 1988 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, who has served for 31 years in a variety of key leadership positions, including deployments to Kosovo and Afghanistan. His most recent position before his current command was as Chief of Staff of the Futures and Concept Center in Army Futures Command. He holds a Master of Science degree in Social Psychology from Pennsylvania State University and a Master's degree from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. Well, I now invite General George to join me on camera and to provide some remarks.
Hey, Tom, thank you. And it's great to be back with you again and have this opportunity to share with you and those that are online with us. Appreciate the introduction. Look, I want to start with a little bit about DEVCOM. You mentioned we're Combat Capabilities Development Command is our full name, and it's a lot easier to say DEVCOM. And so when you hear DEVCOM, that's who we're talking about. Our mission really is to be the scientific and technological foundation of the modernization enterprise. We do that through world-leading research, development, lifecycle engineering, and analysis. And we accomplish that with a team of more than 15,000 scientists, engineers, analysts, technicians, and support staff. And we're at over 90 locations in CONUS in the United States and over 20 locations overseas. Our primary organizations, you've probably heard of these, the Army Research Lab, and we have 7 research and development centers, and those are focused across the country on armaments, aviation and missiles, C5ISR, chemical biological defense, data and analysis, ground vehicle systems, and the soldier. And then we also have 3 forward element centers overseas as the international face of DEVCOM to identify partnership opportunities, facilitate interaction with foreign governments and non-government entities, as well as industry, and to promote interoperability among our allies. So it's a large and diverse team, really a team of teams, and we have that one goal: provide comprehensive research, state-of-the-art technology, development, analysis, and engineering services that produce capabilities to enable our Army to modernize and be effective in multi-domain operations as part of the integrated joint force. And so, as Tom mentioned, we're part of Army Futures Command and under General Murray. And General Murray is leading a persistent modernization for the Army in order to provide future warfighters with concepts, capabilities, and organizational designs needed for that future operating environment. And so, like the rest of the Futures Command and the Army, we're laser focused on the 6 Army modernization priorities and support to the Army cross-functional teams, those 8 cross-functional teams. But because we also do fundamental research and foundational research, we're focused on what the possibilities are for the future battlefield, the what could be's. Our scientists are working today to make science fiction really tomorrow's soldiers' capabilities. So to illustrate how we do this, I'm going to talk about a few topics to show how we pursue technologies from an idea stage to working with our soldiers and transitioning capabilities that soldiers use in the field. So 3 things I'm going to talk about just real quickly, and I'll turn it back over. First, Team Ignite. Team Ignite is a concept that brings together DEVCOM technology, forecasting expertise, and the Futures and Concept Center's ability as another part of Futures Command to develop concepts and requirements. So I'll come back to that. The second component is what we're doing with Project Convergence as the Army's campaign of learning, where we do S&T in the dirt, in soldiers' hands and in formations, so we can mature our technologies and learn about how do we integrate them in order to converge capabilities for the future. And then lastly, I'll talk just a minute about a couple of experiments that we're doing with soldiers. One is expedient leader follower, and the second is unmanned teaming. And these were really 2 capabilities we've been working with soldiers on recently. In fact, I just saw one of them last week at Fort Polk, Louisiana at the JRTC, Joint Readiness Training Center. So first, Team Ignite. Team Ignite really started as a collaboration between us and DEVCOM and the Futures and Concept Center, where I came from in my last job. And we did that to enhance Army Futures Command's ability to enable modernization against this increasingly sophisticated and capable peer competitors and adversaries. And it's really focused this year on artificial intelligence, autonomy, and robotics. Those are General Murray's priorities for us this year. And what he wants to do with Team Ignite is really to back up the Futures and Concept Centers, their concepts for the future force, as well as future investments with hard data, sound analysis, and then really a grounded projection into the future of what's possible. I'd say it's really about linking up our scientists, our engineers and technologists with those who are writing the concepts and writing our future requirements. And ultimately, we want to create a culture of collaboration and connection so that we always have the right expertise together very deliberately and thinking about the future. So again, creating a culture of connection or collaboration, moving from historical happenstance, sort of the serendipitous collaboration that happened, more to routine, repeatable collaboration with those right teammates together. And principally, it's, if you would imagine, you want our concepts writers to write about the future operating environment and ways of operating in that future operating environment based on science and not imagination. And that's what we do on the concept side. And then for the requirements writers, it's giving them a grounded projection into the near future based on the technological developments we have in hand today or that are in progress. And so we're also going to institutionalize Team Ignite. We're going to put process, resources, and metrics against it. This past year, we stood up a collaboration platform. We've got over 600 people, participants there across 35 Army organizations. We had over 20 Ignite workshops over the last year, and that informed concepts such as the movement and maneuver concept, cyber, the brigade combat team, amongst others. And we also have had seminars with allied partners, some industry and government agencies to help us along the way. The second component that I wanted to quickly talk about is Project Convergence. And I know most of you have probably heard about this. Good bit of press on Project Convergence 20. You know, we went from experimentation and demonstration in under a year. We had over 750 soldiers, scientists, and engineers and technicians at 3 installations over 1,000 miles in the field. It included from DEVCOM nearly 200 of our personnel bringing the technologies out of the lab and into the dirt. We had 20 technologies in PC20, including one that we call Firestorm. That's a software decision aid that provides real-time targeting and fires coordination to decrease the sensor to shooter time period, really going from tens of minutes to tens of seconds. We, of course, did a lot of data collection. The ARL team, Army Research Lab, alone, and the workup for the experiment produced 3.8 million labeled images from these multiple environments, including work from Hunter Liggett, AP Hill, and Fort Bliss. And then at the actual event for Project Convergence, they collected over 76 gigabytes of data to inform our AI development. For PC21, we're well under the way in planning for Project Convergence 21. One of the things I just wanted to highlight that we're focused on is expanding our systems integration lab at Aberdeen Proving Ground that the C5ISR Center runs. It's the entrance really for industry and our partners to begin to integrate their systems that the Army, as part of the joint fight, will rapidly and continuously integrate to converge effects. It's the lab risk reduction effort, really. So we do it in the lab, we integrate and we test before we put it into the field. It uses realistic, scalable, tactical network architecture, and technologies are integrated and evaluated in that environment so that we can see the stress across the network and how we could have interoperability challenges. You can imagine it's really complex when you start putting Army systems together in this JADC2 environment, and then you connect Air Force, Navy, even DARPA and the Marines capabilities. And so that's going to continue on. It's really, it's generated and it's resourced through a lot of CRADAs. We have 70 CRADAs with our industry partners. Those are cooperative research and development agreements, and that allows our teams across industry and the government to work together in that environment. So that's 21. For Project Convergence 22, we'll be moving from joint to coalition partners, and we'll be expanding in that scale. And then finally, the final point I wanted to talk about is we're really focused on soldier-centered design in DEVCOM and Army Futures Command. I just note over the next 15 months, we have over 250 soldier touch points and experiments that are planned so that we get our technologies informed by our soldiers' feedback. As an example of this, I mentioned leader follower up front. It's an optionally manned autonomous tactical wheel vehicle so that you have a driver and another soldier in the lead cab, and it's followed by unmanned follower vehicles. You can have multiple vehicles following a single vehicle so that driving into harm's way, potentially you've got 2 soldiers driving 4 or more trucks rather than having soldiers in every single truck. And the objective is to operate day and night in all weather conditions. And so we've got a lot of great feedback from the transportation company that's operating these systems at JRTC at Fort Polk. And we will finish our operational tech demo in this fiscal year. And by 2024, should be able to transition from a program of record into equipping the first unit. And then the last and final point is on unmanned teaming. We've done experimentation in many different venues, but one of them was at Fort Carson, Colorado last year, culminated in August. And that was putting soldiers in a mission enabling demonstrator where they were actually controlling a robotic controlled vehicle surrogate. And we learned a great deal about how soldiers have to sit in the back of one vehicle, controlling another, the challenges that come with that. And it helps us develop the technology and to get it to where soldiers are more comfortable with it. It's more of an enabler, and we were able to work out some of the bugs through that. So really valuable feedback, not only for us, but also for the next generation combat vehicle cross-functional team who are writing the concepts, requirements, and working with the centers of excellence to formalize those requirements. So Tom, those are just a few notes, comments or thoughts up front. Look forward to the conversation. I also just want to mention that I have my deputy John Willison on the line, and he'll join us. I might call on him for some help in the question and answer period, as well as Mr. Jeff Langout, who leads the Ground Vehicle System Center out in Warren, Michigan for us. Back to you, Tom. Thanks.
Great. General George, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Really interesting. We're going to go to questions and answers now. And again, we're getting a lot coming in through the portal. I encourage you to keep going, keep putting them in there. I'm going to do my best to get to all of them, or as many as we can. While we get a few more, I'm going to ask at least a question or two here. First one, General George, as opposed to for the first half of the last century, now DoD relies on the private sector, industry, and academia for much more of its science and technology than it did in the past. But as you mentioned, your labs continue to churn out great technological solutions for the warfighter. But that, until we get that into equipment, it's not connected. So I'm wondering if you could address, how does this information that you generate in your laboratories, how does that get into the offerings that industry provides the Department of Defense, and also how well is that system working in your judgment?
No, it's a great question. We are focused on transitions and deliverables. So it's a great question. It does really all start with our scientists and engineers, though. So the scientists and engineers that are working on these generally are working with partners in the lab environment. And so whether it's a CRADA, whether it's a patent agreement, whether it's contracted work with our partners in industry, there's that collaboration going on in the lab. And so as the scientists and engineers work on this, they also attend, you can imagine, workshops, information exchanges, and conferences. But the most deliberate way that we do that really is through these cooperative agreements. And I would just say, lastly, one of the ways that we have Army Research Lab that's doing the foundational and fundamental research. They are integrated into multiple hubs across the country, where they are able to work with academia as well as industry at regional sites. And so when they're there working side by side with the partners through these mechanisms that protect intellectual property rights or share them adequately through the agreements, I think that's the real foundational way we share with our industry partners, and even license patents to them to use should they choose to do so.
Great, thank you. So next question. One of the Army's big priorities is next generation combat vehicle, and underneath that is the optionally manned fighting vehicle, which is, they're working on it this year, as a matter of fact. Last July, the Army released a request for proposals for the vehicle, which at the time they mentioned might include the option for the government to include a design, which was, I think that was kind of a big surprise to the people that watch this kind of stuff. Obviously, your ground vehicle center would be the player in that effort. And then later on, the Army, in fact, said they ruled out submitting a design, and not a lot of explanation. I was hoping you could tell us what took place.
Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating. I mentioned earlier I got Jeff Langout on the line, who leads our Ground Vehicles System Center. I'm going to see if Jeff, can you pipe in maybe and provide some clarity on that?
Sure.
Over.
Yes, sure, happy to. Thanks for the question. So appreciate the question. So it's really, pretty simple. Well, it's pretty simple from my perspective. So at the Ground Vehicle System Center, we are the engineers that are directly supporting the next generation combat vehicle cross-functional team. We're the engineering expertise, the predominant engineering expertise that General Kaufman and his team uses to figure out what they want to do. We're also the engineers that are largely embedded in the Program Executive Office for Ground Combat Systems, therefore the program office where this vehicle would be ultimately built and competed. So as you can imagine, that right off the bat puts us in a significant potential conflict of interest, because we would have been the engineers helping with requirements development, characteristics development. We would be the engineers that support writing evaluation criteria, and all the things involved that you would have in a competitive procurement. So when we started this, we were hopeful that I could wall off a piece of my organization with individuals that had nothing to do with either our cross-functional team or our program office that was getting ready for the Option Manned Fighting Vehicle. And we were hopeful that we could find enough people that it had nothing to do with it, thereby eliminating the conflict of interest clause. Well, that turned out to be almost impossible, because we have so many folks up and down the chain through all of the pieces that make up what would be an Option Manned Fighting Vehicle. And so, we were really struggling, frankly, with conflict of interest challenges. On top of that, industry, we said all along, one of the things that's going to be different about Option Manned Fighting Vehicle is that we are really going to listen hard to industry, and we want to hear what they have to say. Well, industry made it clear that they thought there was too much conflict of interest. And so I think, as time went along and data started materializing and facts emerged, it became clear that if we continued as a full-fledged competitor, that the chances, even if we could get through the conflict of interest challenges, that the chances of protests and significantly long protests were so likely that would only delay the overall program, months and months, and maybe even into years. And it just that just became something that the Army didn't want to do, and thus we were removed from competition. Over.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. That was really informative. I'm going to go to the audience now for some questions. They're coming in, and I don't want to leave any on the table here. The first one is from Raymond Dubois, who if it's the same one, I think was a former Undersecretary of the Army, and he asks, how do you, Ccdc or DEVCOM, relate to ASALT, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology?
So, there's a couple of ways. One is at the ground level between our engineers and the PMs, right? So at the working level where the hard work gets done, as Jeff just mentioned, our engineers are embedded in the PMs and the PEO. So we have a talent pool of engineers as well as scientists that continue to feed off of each other and then get into the work of the PMs. As you work up the sort of the chain of command, we inside of ASALT, they have the DASA R&T so it's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology, which is essentially the policy and oversight arm in the department, and so they work really with Army Futures Command, who now owns the S&T integration responsibility for not only our command, but also the Medical Research Development Command, SMDC. They work with RICTO, and they're bringing together the program. And so from AFC to DAS R&T, that's really where the connection occurs. And then we are certainly feed into DAS R&T through the Army Futures Command. An example of this is there's a section in the NDAA called 233 that gives us the opportunity to ask for exceptions to certain ways of operating that would allow the labs to be more effective. So we route that requirement or that request through AFC to DAS R&T, and then they integrate with OSD policy or OSD R&E on that. So that's sort of the connection, but we're most closely working together at the PEO to DEVCOM command level, and then at the center to PEO level, and then with engineers on PEOs and PM staffs. Over.
Great answer. Thank you so much. This question comes from Sydney Friedberg. Very specific question. Can you speak to the newly announced CRADA with the Korean firm Hanwha? And specifically, he's interested in the significance of this new agreement with a major OEM in a major non-NATO ally.
This would be a short answer. No, I cannot. For Sydney, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who the CRADA is with. So typically the CRADAs, we've got over 600 CRADAs in DEVCOM with industry partners. And so these CRADAs are agreements between centers based on their competencies and industry partners. And sometimes we have multiple CRADAs at different centers, and then we have some CRADAs at the headquarters level that cover agreements with multiple centers. But I don't know the answer to that one, Sydney. I can certainly try to find out, but unless John Wilson or Jeff know anything about it, I can't answer you on that one.
Okay, great. We'll move on. Sydney, we owe you something on that one. Christian Millord asks, how similar is your command, your lab, those types of things with the other military branches? And do you share information? Is there any crossover between, say, the Navy and the Air Force with what you do?
Great question. And yes, absolutely. We, at multiple levels. So at the headquarters level, we have something we call the Lab Commander Sync, and we meet on a quarterly basis. I meet with my staff and the staffs of AFRL, ONR. We have the Coast Guard also joins us, and we share information about things that how do we measure ourselves for success? How are we doing for delivering capability? And what are opportunities for us to work together at the lab level? And so then at the lab level and the center level, there are these cooperative research projects going on to advance some of the capabilities. An example of that is at our Picatinny Arsenal, where the Armament Center is. Some of the work that we were doing for the Strategic Long Range Cannon took advantage of the Navy's research on their big cannon systems. In fact, we were able to borrow some of their equipment to get us started really quickly. So we saved a lot of time in that project, in that program. So we're always looking for those opportunities. We have a great relationship with the other services, and yeah, so it's working well, and certainly gives us greater opportunity to advance our capabilities.
Great, thank you for that. General George, another question, and this one comes from Ellen Piccioli. I think I'm probably mispronouncing that. She's interested in your thoughts on how researchers and academia can engage with you and your team. What would be some entry points? Yeah,
so first of all, for anybody that wants to work with us, whether it's small business, non-traditionals, academics, industry, a simple way to sort of get engaged and for us to help you get to the right place, because we do have these pockets of capabilities at our different centers. On our website, sorry to direct you to a website, but if you go to the website, there's a link on the Army.mil Ccdc website that gets you to our technology transfer office. That technology transfer office essentially serves as a Sherpa for you to help you get connected to the right place. One of the things that I would say to look forward to in the near future is in our Team Ignite work, we will have additional forums where we'll be opening up to academia and industry. If you are interested in those opportunities and would like to hear more about it later, you can certainly send us an email on our website. Send it to our PAO, for example, and we'll make sure you get information about the opportunities for the conversations that are going to go under Team Ignite, which is really a fascinating place to engage, so you can see what we're thinking about the future, and you can see how we're doing on developing technologies to address those challenges.
Great, thank you for that. And we did have a specific question from Joe Tigas about how he gets involved with Project Ignite, so that your answer was very helpful. Next question comes from Dan Roper over at AUSA, and he asked, could you describe your collaboration with the joint partners that are going to be playing in Project Convergence 2021 and the release of the Joint All-Domain Operations Concept?
Hey, Dan, thanks for the question. Yeah, so when we are building out PC21, ASC headquarters has an OPT running, They just finished, for example, a week-long series at the 06 level, and they are looking at the actual mission threads that we're going to run through. And those mission threads include our joint partners. The joint partners are on the OPT with us at General Richardson's level at AFC headquarters. He has a 3-star GOSC. In fact, we have one meeting this Friday, and at that GOSC, he has his 3-star partners from the other services joining him. And so we're working at that level to make sure in our planning and then in our execution that we're tied with our joint partners. At the lab level, an exciting thing that we're doing in the SIL, the Systems Integration Lab at Aberdeen, is we are laying in the pipeline so that we can connect to our joint partners in the Air Force and Navy, so that you can imagine if we're running a mission thread that includes an F-35 in it through their gateway, we now have a way to connect in the lab level to share information, actually shoot data across the network and see how that works out. You know, we're going to work out a lot of bugs, and we're going to uncover a lot of issues in our data architecture and the data fabric that we'll have to work on in that. But we definitely are connected. It's Project Convergence has given us an opportunity to connect in a way that I haven't seen before. So I'm excited for the future opportunities there.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Bobby Arnold asks a quick question. He's interested in medical care, and he's interested in research and development on medical care. And I don't think that's part of your portfolio, but could you speak to that for a moment?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a medical research and development command that's actually part of Futures Command as well. And that medical research and development command does the medical capability development. However, they're very closely tied with our Soldier Center at NATIC. And so at NATIC up in Massachusetts, the Soldier Center is really focused on technologies or capabilities skin out for how a soldier can become more effective. In fact, the Soldier Center has a program where they're outfitting soldiers for the 10th Mountain Division in a battalion with wearable sensors, and they're learning a lot about sleep, rest, nutrition. They can actually monitor for COVID in a way that over time you can have a baseline to know if somebody may be getting sick. That battalion is going to deploy with their equipment to Afghanistan in the near future. So that collaboration between the Soldier Center and USARIM, an arm of the Medical Research and Development Command at NATIC that does environmental medicine, they work hand in hand, and they actually also share research volunteers, that the soldiers that go there and that spend 90 days at a time and volunteer in both environments. So you're seeing skin out and skin in all in the same place to advance how a soldier performs and squads and how they perform.
Excellent, thanks. Next question comes from someone I think you'll know, General George David Komar, retired Brigadier General. He's interested in, so he can see a lot of effort going into modernizing the equipment of the Army, and he makes a good point that the equipment is maybe not even the most important thing. It's about how we develop our concepts and our operating plans and that type of thing. And so he's interested, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but how do we ensure that the necessary intellectual work is being put in to concept development, the similar levels of effort put into concept development and experimentation that we are applying to equipment modernization?
Dave, good to hear from you. Yeah, no, it's a great question, and Dave and I have worked together in the past, and we know it starts with concepts and requirements. One of the things that we've rejuvenated, and Dave, you'll recall this as being Unified Quest. It was the series of seminar war games that Arctic under TRADOC used to run, now Futures and Concept Center, and now it's called the Future Study Program. Under General McKean, who leads Futures and Concept Center, in November they just had their first event to kick it off for this year, and getting at the intellectual, understanding the future operating environment. They're gonna look at the character of warfare in an upcoming seminar. They're gonna do a future study war game towards the end of this year to really get after how do we shape those concepts. And this is all the part of the beauty of one of the things that's really good about Futures Command is having DEVCOM and the Futures and Concept Center together under the same command, so that you are linking and we're using Team Ignite to do that, but linking concepts with potential and what we could do in the future, so that we're shaping concepts, and then we're actually getting driven by the demand signal out of those concepts. But yeah, you'd be happy to know, Dave, a lot of that's been sort of re-energized, and at the end of this year, I think you'll see some reports coming out on new views of the future operating environment and new potential ways of operating there.
Thank you, General George. Great question coming in from Deborah Casarati, and she's concerned about operation security, and so she appreciates all the great information that you're sharing and the other things that the Army does to communicate its efforts. But she worries that as we've kind of been made aware that there are other countries listening in to our communications, including the Russians and China perhaps. And so she's a bit torn on this whole, are we giving out too much information, and interested in your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, Deborah, it's a really good point, and you know, you can read about it. I've seen it in spades. We know that our potential adversaries are trying to get our information, and they will go to pretty lengthy measures to, I mean, frankly, steal from us our intellectual property. And so it's a balance, though, right? And at the basic research level, when we operate with students at our academic institutions, you know, how do you ensure that you're enabling freedom of discovery in very sort of broad sense of scientific discovery, while at the same time, as you sort of get closer to applied or advanced research, you narrow down and limit those that you partner with. And we actually rewrote policy this past, not policy, but internal command policy this past summer on how we'll manage that, for the very reason that you're talking about. I will tell you, General Murray is very interested in protecting our IP, and I use IP and just, you know, our advanced capabilities, and we're taking measures at multiple levels to protect that, to include putting more things in higher classification so that it's a little bit harder to get after.
Excellent, thank you for that. So this question comes from Nicholas Nelson. He's interested, you spoke about your CRADAs with industry. He's interested about how your relationship, your roles, with the UARCs, which I think is University Affiliated Research Centers, and FFRDCs, federally funded research and development centers. Took me a second there. So your relationship with those types of organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. John Wilson, stand by, because I'm going to give just the basics, and I'm going to ask you to pile on. I was just out recently in California at the Institute of Creative Technologies, which is one of those UARCs that you're talking about. And we guide their work through the Army Research Lab, principally, and through the Army Research Office. And they, so you can imagine, they have sort of core competencies at these different UARCs that we rely on them for. John Wilson, anything to add to that?
Hey, sir, thanks, and thanks everyone for joining in on this. So, yeah, I would quickly say we've got 10,000 engineers and scientists within our command, and we put about $10 billion out annually to partners, and that includes academia, industry, joint partners, et cetera. And it's a recognition that, you know, while we've got a lot of smart people, there's even more smart people outside our command than inside the command. So through the foundational research work that ARL does, and then research work that the centers do, we manage or use the different UARCs as well as the FFRDCs as strategic partners. And in the case with the foundational research, we've got the job for the Army to manage those and to interface with those. And so, you know, it's space to space dependent, but they're an important part of the team. Over.
Great, thank you, John. Next question comes from John Sabella, and he's interested about how the experiences of the recent conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh area, you know, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, are affecting your warfighting plans, how you look at the need for technology, specifically Azerbaijan's effective use of their loitering munitions and their other drone-employed platforms?
It's a great question, and if you watch the videos like I have, it's a pretty intense and really illuminates the risks that we have based on some of the UAVs and the threats that they can provide. You know, the Army's studying it. The work that the Joint Counter UAS Office is doing is really looking at that inside of the Army, and the Army's the executive agent for that, for the Joint Counter UAS project. But inside the Army, when you go to the Futures and Concept Center, the centers of excellence, that's really where the studying and the incorporation of the threat, and to include the future operating environment, understanding that threat, then drives the chain of events that will ultimately come to us to help shape the technologies that we deliver. But I mean, frankly, we have technologies available now. There are so many counter UAS capabilities. We understand the threat pretty well. It's not so much a science and technology challenge as it is an integration challenge of existing capabilities and getting the right capabilities out into the force. But it's a great point. That's one area that we watch. There are other threat areas that we keep our eye on, and it really feeds through the G2 channels, the intel channels, into the concepts and requirements, and ultimately to us to help find new solutions for them.
Yeah, excellent. Quick question. We're in the lightning round. We're getting low on time. What's your relationship with DARPA?
Yeah, we do work with DARPA, but it's at the center level, and we share. What we try to do is share the work that's going on in a way that we don't have too much of overlapping effort, and then we share the outcomes of our research to inform each other. You'd be interested to know, I think, that at Project Convergence 21, DARPA is going to bring some of their capabilities. And so it's an opportunity for us to integrate really sort of, I would call, novice capabilities that are pretty low on the technological development scale together, and we'll continue to learn how the products out of the labs and out of DARPA could potentially integrate together. They're a great partner. We always work to stay close with them, as well as our other partners like the Engineering and Research and Development Center, the Corps of Engineers Center that does their technology development, as well as SMDC, et cetera. Over.
Thanks much. This is probably going to be our last question. It's from Christopher Spillman, and he's interested in, and I'll frankly don't even understand the question completely, but that is, can you discuss some of the advanced technologies that you see as most critical to the Army's synthetic training strategy that you might be working on?
Yeah, so we have a cross-functional team called Synthetic Training Environment, and they are building, the thing that I think is most important that they're building is this concept of having one world terrain. When you look at all the systems that the Army has used over time for whether it's training, visualization, there are multiple feeds of different types of terrain models. What General Maria Gervais has been able to do is narrow that down to a single feed that creates a shareable one world view of the terrain that can be used in these multiple functional areas. I think that's probably the most important one, and then you see a lot of the virtualization in the goggles and virtual reality or synthetic reality that will pipe in. Industry leads in most of those areas, and so what Maria has done is created great partnerships with industry to pull the best of breed into her work. But I would say really it's the terrain model that's the base of that synthetic training environment we've got to get right.
Well, thank you very much. And my apologies, we're out of time. And so if I didn't get to your question, that's my fault. What a great session. I'd like to thank our guest, Major General George, for sharing his insights on his organization and all the great things they're doing. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us for this conversation. If you work at the Hill or a think tank, or you just have questions we're going to provide you our contact information listed on the screen, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Immediately following this event, you'll receive a survey that we hope you'll complete so that we can bring ideas back to you about what we can do in the future. And so you can also check out the events that we have coming up at heritage.org/events. I will mention for your calendars that we are going to have the Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville, coming over on January the 13th, talking about the new year, the new administration, and what he hopes to accomplish. And so, ladies and gentlemen, have a great rest of your day and a happy holidays, and thanks for joining us today.